Good evening, my friends. Welcome to the Bedtime Bard, home to gentle stories for the late hours. Tonight, we'll drift back to ancient Egypt, where the Nile kept time like a slow heartbeat, and a kingdom of pyramids, temples, and quiet mysteries rose from the sand. Imagine a quiet night in ancient Egypt. The air is warm, the sky is studded with stars, and the Nile moves through the darkness like a ribbon of black glass. Somewhere in the distance, a temple lamp flickers, and the stone walls hold the day's heat for just a little longer. In a world without clocks, this is how time feels: slow, steady, and alive. For thousands of years, people lived close to this river, trusting it to return again and again. They planted grain when the waters lowered. They watched boats drift past their fields, and they built monuments meant to last longer than memory. They believed the land itself had a rhythm, and that rhythm could be protected. And in their stories, the sun rose each morning not by chance, but as part of a sacred order. Tonight, we'll take a gentle journey through that world. You don't need to memorize anything, and you don't need to hold on to every detail. Just listen as the story unfolds in calm steps, like footsteps in sand. We'll meet pharaohs, rulers of Egypt, and guardians of a sacred balance they called Ma'at. We'll visit the age of the pyramids and try to understand them not as mysteries, but as human achievements shaped by belief and organization. We'll step into temples where gods felt close and familiar, and we'll return often to everyday life, where families cooked bread, brewed beer, and watched the river change with the seasons. This is not only the history of kings, it is the story of a whole civilization learning how to live with time. And every part of this story begins in the same place. Before pyramids and tombs, before royal names carved into stone, there is the Nile. In the next part, we'll stay close to the river and see how it quietly created the conditions for ancient Egypt to begin. If you could float above Egypt in silence, you would see two worlds side by side. One is the pale desert, wide and dry, stretching toward the horizon. The other is a narrow ribbon of green, following the Nile like a living line. That fertile strip is where people could grow food, build homes, and stay close to water. Along the river, the air smelled of wet earth and plants, especially after the flood. Reeds moved gently in the breeze, and birds settled in the shallows. At dawn, the water reflected the sky like a mirror. This quiet landscape shaped the way people lived, worked, and planned. Egypt began as a river society long before it became a kingdom. For much of the year, life followed a pattern shaped by the Nile. In ancient times, the river flooded seasonally and spread water across the fields. When the water slowly pulled back, the land was left dark and fertile. People planted into that softened soil, and later they gathered grain as the season warmed. This cycle made large communities possible. A good harvest could feed families, but it could also support builders, potters, sailors, and scribes. Extra grain could be stored, traded, or used to supply long projects. Step by step, villages became towns, and towns became organized centers. Food became stability, and stability created options. The Nile was also Egypt's main road. Boats carried people and goods up and down the river, connecting settlements that might otherwise feel far apart. Heavy materials, like stone and timber, moved more easily by water than by land. Travel along the Nile encouraged trade, shared customs, and stronger ties between regions. Over time, the the river made Egypt feel like one connected space. As communities grew, work became more specialized. Some people farmed, while others made pottery, tools, and textiles. Some became builders, and others became traders who moved goods between towns. And gradually, some became administrators, people whose job was to manage supplies, labor, and records. Even early on, Egypt depended on organization as much as effort. These systems required cooperation. Grain had to be measured and stored carefully. Canals needed repair, and embankments needed attention after floods. Work crews had to be guided, and resources had to be shared fairly. In a quiet way, this was the beginning of government. And as life repeated these seasons, Egyptians began to feel time in a special way. The year was not only a line moving forward, but a loop returning again and again. This supported the idea that the world could remain balanced even when problems appeared. Later, this feeling connected naturally to Ma'at, the sacred principle that the universe had an intended order, and that harmony, justice, and balance could be maintained through right action. It was a calm promise that stability could be protected. As the population expanded, different regions began to form clear identities. You might hear the terms Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, and they can sound confusing at first. Upper Egypt refers to the southern Nile Valley, where the river flows from higher ground. Lower Egypt refers to the northern delta, where the river spreads out before reaching the Mediterranean Sea. The names describe the river's direction, not a map's top and bottom. These regions sometimes worked together and sometimes competed. Local leaders gained influence, and symbols of authority began to appear. Communities needed protection, decision-making, and coordination, especially when managing land and food. Slowly, power began to concentrate. The conditions for kingship were forming. Egypt was also connected to the wider world beyond the riverbanks. The desert offered stone, minerals, and routes for travel. Mines in the Sinai provided copper and turquoise, used for tools and jewelry. Trade paths linked Egypt to nearby regions, bringing unfamiliar goods and new ideas. Even in early times, Egypt was part of a larger network. And through it all, the Nile asked people to plan ahead. Water had to be shared, fields had to be timed, and canals had to be maintained season after season. Over generations, this turned cooperation into a quiet strength and small communities into something more organized. And as that organization grew, Egypt was ready for its next step. In the next part, we'll meet the first pharaohs and see how one kingdom began to take shape. Around 3100 BC, Egypt reached a turning point. This is the period most often linked to unification, Upper and Lower Egypt becoming one kingdom. A ruler named Narmer is often connected to this moment, and later tradition sometimes remembers him as Menes. The exact path into unity is still debated, but the result is clear. Egypt began to act like a single kingdom. One of the most famous objects from this time is the Narmer palette, a carved stone piece that feels almost like an announcement. It shows royal power in symbolic form, and it connects the ruler with both crowns. Those crowns represented the two regions, and seeing them together suggests a new kind of order. It is not a quiet image. It is a statement that something has changed. With unity came the need for a steady center, and Memphis became a major royal city. It stood near the entry of the delta, where the river branches and the land opens outward. From there, a ruler could reach north and south more easily. Memphis was both practical and symbolic. It helped the kingdom feel held in place. In this early world, kingship was never only about control. The ruler was expected to protect balance, the way people hoped the Nile would return in the right season. Egyptians would later call this balance ma'at, the sense that the world had a rightful shape and that it could be kept steady through right action. A united kingdom made that idea feel real in everyday life. It made the future feel more stable. As the new state grew, it became quieter and stronger at the same time. Officials began to measure grain and organize storage. Labor crews could be directed toward building, irrigation, and temple work. Records became more common because planning required memory. Egypt was learning how to count, track, and prepare. Early writing appears in this period in small but meaningful ways. Marks on labels and tomb goods recorded names, ownership, and offerings. They were not long stories yet, but they carried a powerful idea. What mattered could be kept, quietly, carefully, and for later. A kingdom that could write could also remember itself. Religion also helped shape this early kingship. The king was closely connected to Horus, the falcon god linked with rightful rule and protection. This connection made the ruler feel like part of something continuous, stretching beyond one lifetime. It was a way of saying that Egypt's leadership was not random. It belonged to a sacred pattern. By around 2700 BC, the foundations were firm. Egypt had unity, growing institutions, and a sense of sacred kingship that felt permanent. It was ready to express that permanence in stone. In the next part, we'll enter the Old Kingdom, where pyramids rise above the desert like calm mountains, shaped by human hands. The Old Kingdom, from roughly 2686 to 2181 BC, is often remembered as Egypt's Great Age of Pyramids. It was a period that felt steady and organized, with enough confidence to support long projects year after year. Grain was stored, labor was directed, and the state could plan far ahead. In that calm stability, Egypt began to build in stone on a scale that still feels extraordinary. Pyramids were built as royal tombs, but they were also symbols of permanence. They were meant to endure, not just for one lifetime, but for generations. Their shape rises with quiet certainty, like a mountain formed by careful human hands. For many Egyptians, this kind of building was connected to the idea of eternity. It made the landscape feel ordered, protected, and lasting. One of the earliest steps toward pyramid building came around the middle of the 2600s BC, with a king named Djoser. He built the step pyramid at Saqqara, a structure that still feels like the beginning of something new. It started as a mastaba, a flat-topped tomb, and then expanded upward in layers. Around it, a broad sacred complex took shape, with courtyards and ritual spaces arranged into a carefully planned world. Behind this early stone architecture, there is also a human story. Djoser's architect is often remembered as Imhotep, a figure associated with planning and innovation. Whether we picture him as one individual or as the name of a tradition, the meaning is the same. Egypt was learning how to turn ideas into stone with precision, and once that craft took hold, it continued to deepen over time. Not long after, pyramid building reached its peak in the 4th dynasty. A pharaoh named Sneferu experimented with different forms and gradually refined their design. His pyramids show a quiet process of learning as builders adjusted angles and strengthened structure. In this period, Egypt wasn't improvising. It was developing a craft through patience, experience, and careful revision. Then came Khufu, whose name is closely tied to the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid became the most famous monument of the age, not because it is mysterious, but because it is so deliberate and exact. It rises with a steady geometry that feels almost unreal in the desert light. Nearby, later rulers added their own pyramids, shaping the Giza Plateau into a royal landscape. The horizon itself began to carry the mark of intention. These monuments were not built through chaos, but through planning. Stone was cut in quarries, shaped carefully, and moved in stages. The Nile helped with transport, making heavy movement possible by boat and canal. Work increased during seasons when farming slowed, especially when floodwater covered the fields. Over many years, the pyramid rose layer by layer through thousands of ordinary working days. It also helps to picture the builders as real people with real routines. Archaeology suggests the workforce was organized and supported, with housing, food supplies, and clear teams. Some crews even had names, almost like groups that took pride in their role. Seen this way, pyramid building becomes less like a myth and more like a society working in coordination. The human side makes the achievement feel not only possible, but deeply real. A pyramid was never meant to stand alone. Each one belonged to a wider funerary complex, a sacred system of temples and ritual spaces surrounding the tomb. A causeway often linked the pyramid to a valley temple closer to the river. Priests performed daily offerings to sustain the king's spirit after death. These rituals made the pyramid more than architecture. It became a place where memory was kept alive. Inside the pyramid and its surrounding spaces, the goal was continuity. The king's body was protected, and the tomb was filled with objects meant to support a calm journey beyond life. Some beliefs described the king traveling with the sun, moving through darkness and returning with light. This is one reason pyramids can feel connected to the sky, even without knowing every detail. They were built not only to hold a person, but to hold an idea. Later writers sometimes painted pyramid kings in harsh colors, and those stories shaped modern imagination. But Egypt's own long memory often treated these rulers as part of a proud and enduring past. And whatever people believed about the personalities behind the pyramids, the structures themselves remain. They hold their shape through wind, heat, and time. Even now, they seem to radiate patience. When you look at the pyramids, you can sense what Egypt was trying to express: a civilization that could plan far ahead and build with quiet discipline, a society that believed stability could be created, protected, and preserved. The pyramids are monuments to rulers, but they are also monuments to coordination and effort. They show what people can do when they move together, slowly and steadily. And yet, the Pyramid Age is only one part of Egypt's relationship with eternity. Beyond these great stone forms, there were quieter tombs filled with symbols, texts, and protective objects. There were rituals meant to guide a person safely forward, step by step. So now we can move gently from monumental stone into the softer world of tombs, mummies, and the afterlife. For Egyptians, death was not an end, but a transformation. The living prepared for it with care, as if they were helping someone move into a new home. A tomb was often imagined as a house for eternity, built to feel safe and familiar. This was not meant to be dark or frightening. It was meant to protect identity and preserve peace. Royal tombs could be grand, but the same idea existed across many levels of society. In early periods, nobles were often buried in mastabas, meaning flat-roofed tombs made from brick or stone. These structures were simple in shape, but carefully planned inside. They included spaces for offerings, because Egyptians believed the spirit still needed support. Even a quiet tomb was made with attention. Inside tombs, Egyptians filled the walls with scenes of daily life. You might see fields of grain, cattle moving slowly through reeds, fishermen working on calm water, and families gathered at a table. These images were not only decoration, they were meant to continue life in a stable form, as if the person could return to these moments again and again. The tomb became a place where ordinary life could last. This connects to Egyptian ideas about the soul. They believed a person had different spiritual parts. One was the Ka, meaning a life force that needed offerings and care. Another was the Ba, meaning personality, which could move and travel. Tomb scenes and rituals were designed to help these parts remain whole, recognized, and safe. Over time, burial practices grew more detailed, and mummification became an important part of preparation. The goal was preservation, meaning keeping the body intact so it could be known in the afterlife. Embalmers developed careful methods over many centuries. The process was slow, deliberate, and treated as sacred work. It was not meant to be disturbing, but respectful. First, the body was washed and purified. Then it was prepared so that it would last, protected from decay. A natural salt called natron was used to dry the body over many days. After that, the body was wrapped in layers of linen, creating a calm and careful covering. The final result was not meant to look harsh, but protected and complete. During the wrapping, Egyptians often placed amulets, meaning small protective charms, within the layers. These charms could take the shape of sacred symbols, animals, or eyes. Each one was meant to offer reassurance, like protection carried quietly into the unknown. Even the smallest objects were chosen with meaning. In this way, care became part of the journey. One important burial ritual was called the opening of the mouth ceremony. In this rite, priests symbolically restored the senses of the deceased. The idea was gentle and simple. The person would be able to breathe, speak, and see in the next life. After that, the tomb could be sealed with peace. Tombs also held goods that felt useful and comforting. There could be furniture, clothing, jewelry, food, and small personal items. Some tombs even included games, because Egyptians imagined the afterlife as a continuation of life's calm pleasures. They pictured a peaceful place sometimes called the Field of Reeds, a world like Egypt, but without suffering. In that vision, home was not lost. It was returned to. A famous figure in this world is Anubis, the god associated with protection and burial care. He is often shown with the head of a jackal, an animal connected to desert edges and cemeteries. In Egyptian thought, Anubis is not a symbol of fear. He is a symbol of guidance and careful ritual. He represents safe passage, handled with respect. Another central belief was judgment after death. Egyptians imagined a scene where the heart was weighed on a scale against a feather. The feather represented truth and balance, and the goal was harmony, not punishment. If the heart was steady and honest, the soul could continue forward. This belief encouraged people to live well, not out of panic, but out of responsibility. To support this journey, Egyptians sometimes included texts with prayers and protective words. These writings became more common over time, and later they were gathered into collections often called the Book of the Dead. The purpose was not to frighten the living. It was to help the path feel known, like walking with a guide. The afterlife, in Egyptian thought, was a place you could prepare for. these traditions continued long after the Pyramid Age. Even when royal burials moved away from pyramids and into hidden tombs, the main ideas remained the same. People still wanted preservation, protection, and continuity. The style changed, but the intention stayed steady. In a quiet way, every tomb was a statement that life mattered enough to be carried forward. And after spending time in this world of tombs and rituals, it becomes easier to understand Egypt as a whole. The Egyptians built for two worlds at once, the visible world of daily life and the invisible world beyond it. That same balance shaped their temples, their stories, and their sense of time. So now we can return to the living kingdom again and drift forward into Egypt's next great chapter, where power shifts and renewal begins. After the Old Kingdom ended, Egypt entered a time of uncertainty. The royal center became weaker, and the country slowly lost the tight coordination that once supported pyramid building. Officials in distant regions began to rely more on local power than on the royal court. Over time, Egypt started to feel less like one unified system. There was not one single cause for this change, but several pressures that built up over time. Some years may have brought lower floods and weaker harvests, straining food supplies and making people anxious. At the same time, local governors gained influence because they controlled land, storage, and workers in their own areas. As local leaders gained strength, the king's authority could fade. What once felt like one kingdom began to loosen into many smaller centers. This era is often called the First Intermediate Period, stretching roughly from 2181 to 2055 BC. Rival courts appeared in different parts of Egypt, especially in the north and the south. Instead of one steady capital guiding everything, regions followed their own leaders and priorities. Egypt did not collapse into chaos everywhere, but it did lose unity. The feeling of one shared direction was no longer as strong. Yet even in divided times, most people still lived close to the land. Farmers planted grain when the floodwaters pulled back. Families baked bread, repaired homes, and traded in local markets. Temples received offerings, and seasonal work continued. History changed at the top, but daily life stayed surprisingly steady. Over time, unity returned from the south. Around 2055 BC, a king from Thebes reunited the country and began what we call the Middle Kingdom. Thebes was a powerful city where leadership had grown strong again. The king's name was Mentuhotep II, and his victory created a new beginning. Egypt became one kingdom again, with a renewed sense of stability. Mentuhotep's reign did not only change politics, it helped restore confidence, as if the country could finally breathe again. Trade routes reopened, temple building returned, and government became more centralized. When central authority is strong, planning becomes easier, and people feel safer over time. In a quiet way, the Middle Kingdom feels like Egypt rebuilding itself from the inside. The Middle Kingdom is often remembered as a classical age, a period of strong culture, art, and thoughtful identity. Egypt kept many older traditions, but it also gave them a new tone. Some kings still built pyramids, though these were smaller and often made from materials that did not last as long. What mattered was not size, but continuity. The idea of preparing for eternity remained steady. Mentuhotep II built a mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahri, a peaceful place set against tall cliffs. It feels like architecture designed to rest inside the landscape rather than stand above it. The terraces and open spaces create a calm sense of order. Later, another pharaoh would build a famous temple beside it, but this earlier monument already carried the feeling of renewal. It was a quiet statement that Egypt had returned. During the Middle Kingdom, Thebes grew in importance, along with its major god Amun. Amun was a powerful state god whose worship became closely linked to kingship. Temples were supported across Egypt, strengthening the bond between rulers and the sacred world. One important temple site was Karnak, a vast complex near Thebes that would, over many centuries, become one of the largest religious spaces on Earth. In this era, its growth was just beginning, like a seed that would expand over time. Daily life remained tied to the Nile cycle, but society became more complex. More officials, craftsmen, and administrators gained stable wealth. This created something we might describe as a growing middle class, families who were not royal but could still afford comfort and status. They built better tombs, collected fine goods, and prepared more carefully for the afterlife. In a quiet way, Egypt became broader and deeper. This was also a time when the worship of Osiris grew stronger. Osiris was the god linked with renewal and the afterlife, and his story promised that life could continue after death. In earlier times, the richest burials were mostly limited to kings and elites. Now more people could afford mummification, offerings, and protective objects. The afterlife became something ordinary families could imagine more personally. The Middle Kingdom is also remembered for its literature. Egyptians wrote stories and teachings that were copied and preserved, especially by scribes in training. One famous work is the tale of Sinuhe, shaped by exile, survival, and the pull of home. Other texts offered advice about leadership, morality, and how to live wisely. These writings make the Middle Kingdom feel thoughtful, as if Egypt was speaking in a calmer and more reflective voice. At the same time, Egypt became more active beyond its borders. Forts were built in Nubia, the lands south of Egypt along the Nile, in what is now part of Sudan. Nubia mattered because it was connected to gold, trade routes, and valuable goods from deeper in Africa. These forts helped Egypt protect movement along the river and control important exchange. It was both security and opportunity, shaped into stone. Egypt also improved its farmland through large irrigation projects. One important region was the Fayum, a fertile area southwest of Memphis, where water management could expand agriculture. Engineers guided canals and controlled floods, so more land could produce crops. This brought food, wealth, and stability back into the kingdom. It also shows how Egyptian power often rested on water and planning, not only on armies. But no long era stays unchanged forever. Toward the end of the Middle Kingdom, royal power weakened again, and Egypt became vulnerable. This allowed a new group to rise in the north, known as the Hyksos. The word Hyksos refers to foreign rulers from the eastern Mediterranean region, likely connected to Canaan and the Levant. They did not appear overnight as one invading army. They gradually gained influence through migration, settlement, and control of key trade areas. The Nile Delta was especially important here. The delta is wide, rich, and open to movement from the northeast. It was harder for a weakened central government to control, especially if local rulers were competing for power. The Hyksos established themselves in the north and built their own center of rule. They brought new connections and military technology, including the horse and chariot, which gave them an advantage in conflict. Over time, they held much of Lower Egypt. By around 1550 BC, Hyksos' power in the north came to an end. Leaders from Thebes rose again, pushed northward, and reclaimed the country. This moment marks the start of the New Kingdom, when Egypt becomes stronger and more outward-facing than ever before. It is not only a return to unity, it is a surge into empire, wealth, and monumental temple building. And the story begins to shine with famous names and dramatic changes. During the New Kingdom, Egypt became wealthier and more outward-facing than ever before. Pharaohs maintained trained armies, and chariots became part of warfare and power. Egypt competed with other great states across the eastern Mediterranean, especially in regions like Syria and Palestine. Yet at home, life still moved in familiar rhythms. The Nile rose and fell, fields were planted and harvested, and cities continued to breathe with daily routine. This era is also remembered for its temples, built on a scale that feels endless. Karnak and Luxor became major sacred centers in Thebes, filled with courtyards, towering columns, and carved stone scenes. These places were not only for worship, they were active spaces where workers, priests, musicians, and offerings moved through the day. In the New Kingdom, the sacred world and the public world often felt like one. Many rulers shaped these centuries, but we will focus on a few of the most famous names. These are the pharaohs whose stories still stand clearly in modern memory. Their reigns form a gentle path through the New Kingdom's rise, its peak, and its lasting legacy. And even if we only mention a few, we can still feel the weight of the whole era behind them. The New Kingdom begins with Ahmose I, the king who helped bring Egypt back together around 1550 BC. His victory did more than remove foreign rule. It restored confidence and reopened the future. A unified Egypt could rebuild, trade, and organize its strength again. From this point, Egypt starts to look outward, ready to become an empire. A little later, Egypt is shaped by one of its most remarkable rulers, Hatshepsut. She is remembered as a rare female pharaoh who ruled with calm authority and strong organization. Her reign is often described as prosperous and relatively peaceful. She focused on trade and building, not constant conquest. Her story shows that power can feel steady and quiet rather than loud. Hatshepsut also left behind one of Egypt's most beautiful temples at Deir el-Bahri, set against tall cliffs like a place designed to rest inside the landscape. Its terraces feel balanced and open, with long lines that catch the sunlight gently. Reliefs on the walls show a trading journey to Punt, a distant region associated with incense and rare goods. These scenes make her reign feel practical and vivid, shaped by planning and movement. Even today, her temple carries a sense of calm confidence. After Hatshepsut, Egypt's empire expands strongly under Thutmose III. His reign is remembered for campaigns that extended Egypt's influence far beyond the Nile Valley. These victories brought tribute and wealth into Egypt, strengthening temples and royal projects. But the deeper story is not only military power, it is the way Egypt became connected to distant cities, foreign courts, and wide networks of exchange. As Egypt grew richer, its sacred centers grew as well. Temples received offerings, lands, and workers, turning religion into a living system that touched daily life. Priests maintained rituals, and festivals brought color and music into public space. Stone walls recorded royal achievements, turning history into carved memory. This is part of why the New Kingdom feels so vivid. it left behind voices written in architecture. Later, Egypt reaches a high point of luxury under Amenhotep III in the 13th century BC. His reign is often remembered as a time of wealth, diplomacy, and artistic refinement. Egypt exchanged gifts and royal marriages with other powerful states instead of living in constant war. Building projects and statues spread across the landscape, showing confidence and stability. In this era, Egypt feels polished and bright, like sunlight on painted stone. Then comes a short and unusual moment of change under a ruler named Akhenaten. He promoted a dramatic religious shift, placing special focus on Aten, meaning the sun disk. This change did not last long, but it disrupted the normal pattern of Egyptian temple life. Some traditions were pushed aside, and the royal court briefly followed a different direction. It was as if the kingdom stepped onto a strange path for a moment, then quietly returned. That return is connected with Tutankhamun, the young king known today as King Tut. He ruled briefly in the 13th century BC, and his reign is remembered for restoring older religious traditions after the changes that came before. Temples reopened, familiar rituals returned, and Egypt moved back toward continuity. Tutankhamun himself did not rule long, but his name became famous for another reason. In 1922 AD, his tomb was discovered in the Valley of the Kings with many objects still inside, offering a rare window into New Kingdom craftsmanship. Tutankhamun's burial reminds us how deeply Egyptians valued preparation and protection. Objects were placed carefully, not just as treasure, but as reassurance. The tomb was designed like a quiet supply of comfort for a journey beyond life. Even in an age of empire, Egypt still built for eternity. The afterlife remained close to the center of the culture. Later, the New Kingdom is defined by its most famous builder king, Ramses II. He ruled for a long time and filled Egypt with monuments, statues, and temples. His reign is often remembered as powerful and steady, with Egypt standing tall among rival states. One major event was the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BC, fought against the Hittites. The battle ended without a clear victory, but it led toward diplomacy and a lasting peace agreement. Ramses II also left behind one of Egypt's most dramatic sacred sites, Abu Simbel, carved directly into a cliff in the south. Colossal seated statues face outward into the open desert, calm and immense. Inside, the halls lead deeper into shadow and quiet, creating a gentle sense of transition. The temple feels designed to outlast time itself. Under Ramses, Egypt's greatness becomes something you can see from miles away. This is also a good place to mention a story that lives on in later tradition. Some sacred texts connect Egypt with the story of Exodus, describing a departure of a people from Egyptian rule. Historians still debate how to match this story to specific events, and Egypt's own records do not give a clear version of it. But the tradition remains powerful, and it reflects something real about Egypt's role in the ancient imagination. Egypt was so great and so present in the region that many cultures placed their turning points beside its river. Over time, the New Kingdom began to weaken, as all long eras do. Borders became harder to maintain, internal pressures grew, and new challenges appeared. Yet the temples remained, and the monuments continued to hold their shape. The New Kingdom left behind the clearest image many people carry today: pharaohs, columns, sacred processions, and stone glowing in sunlight. And from here, Egypt's story gradually opens into later centuries, where foreign powers arrive and the ancient world begins to change. So the sound of chariots and festivals slowly fades, but Egypt does not disappear. Its symbols remain, and its sacred landscape endures. The river continues to move through the desert with patient certainty. And as time carries Egypt forward, new rulers will step into the story. Greek, then Roman, while the old temples still remember the names carved into their walls. In ancient Egypt, religion was not a separate part of life. It was woven into nature, time, and everyday routines. People felt the divine in sunlight, in the river's flood, and in the quiet safety of a home. A god was not only a distant figure in a myth. A god could feel like a presence moving through the world. One of the most important gods was Ra, the sun god. Egyptians imagined Ra traveling across the sky each day and passing through darkness each night. Morning was not just a sunrise, it was a return, a daily renewal that promised life could begin again. In a land shaped by cycles, this image felt comforting and steady. Another central figure was Osiris, linked to the afterlife and renewal. Osiris was remembered as a king who died and returned in a new form, becoming ruler of the world beyond life. His story carried the idea that death could be followed by restoration. It also connected to farming, where grain disappears into the earth and returns again. Osiris made the afterlife feel less like an end and more like continuity. Osiris is deeply connected to Isis, who represents devotion, protection, and healing. Egyptians pictured Isis as a powerful mother and a careful guardian. She protects her son Horus, and Horus becomes a symbol of rightful kingship. Over time, pharaohs were linked with Horus in a symbolic way, as if the living ruler carried Horus's role on earth. In this story, family, protection, and authority all blend into one calm myth. To Egyptians, the divine world included forces that were both helpful and dangerous. A god like Seth represented storms, deserts, and disruption. He was not only an enemy in stories, he was also a reminder that nature includes chaos as well as peace. Egyptian religion did not erase the darker forces. It tried to place them inside a wider balance. As Egypt changed over centuries, one god became especially powerful in the state: Amun. Amun began as a local god in Thebes and later rose to national importance. Over time, he merged with the sun god as Amun-Ra, meaning a combined form of hidden power and sunlight. This was not unusual in Egypt. Gods could blend, shift, and expand in meaning as society evolved. Some gods were also closely tied to daily work and skill. Ptah was honored as a creator, god connected to craftsmen and builders, especially in Memphis. Egyptians imagined Ptah shaping the world through thought and speech, like a design brought into reality. For people who built with their hands, that idea felt natural. Work itself could feel sacred. There were also gods connected to knowledge and careful record-keeping. Thoth was linked to wisdom, writing, and measurement. Egyptians imagined him as the divine scribe who keeps track of what is true. In a society that valued memory and order, a god of writing made deep sense. He represents the quiet power of keeping things known. When Egyptians thought about death, they often turned to Anubis, the guardian of burial and embalming. He is shown with the head of a jackal, an animal associated with desert edges and cemeteries. But Anubis was not a frightening figure. He was a protector and guide, connected to ritual care and safe passage. In the Egyptian imagination, the afterlife journey was meant to be supported, not left alone. Alongside these great gods were gentler protectors of home and family. Bastet, the cat goddess, was connected to household safety and calm protection. Egyptians valued cats for practical reasons because they guarded stored grain from pests. But cats also became symbols of warmth and comfort. Bastet made the sacred feel close and personal, like a blessing inside a quiet room. All of these gods could feel present through images, names, and small rituals. A home might hold a simple shrine, a small figure, or a carved symbol for protection. People prayed for health, safe childbirth, good harvests, and peace in the family. Religion was not only for temples, it was part of daily hope. Temples, however, were the great houses of the gods. A temple was designed as a sacred space where divine presence could be cared for through ritual. Many temples lead from open sunlight into deeper shade, moving toward an inner sanctuary. This design created a feeling of transition, as if you were leaving the ordinary world behind. The deeper you walked, the quieter it became. Inside the temple, priests performed daily routines for the god's statue. They offered food and drink, lit incense, and spoke prayers with careful precision. These acts were not meant as theater. They were meant to maintain harmony in the world. The temple was not only spiritual, it was also a place of labor, storage, and organization, supported by workers and supplies. Egyptian festivals brought the gods into public life. Statues could be carried in processions, sometimes on boats or ceremonial platforms. People gathered to watch, sing, and celebrate. Music and scent filled the air, and the city felt alive. Even then, the purpose was not wild chaos, but renewal and shared identity. One of the most famous temple landscapes is Karnak in the region of Thebes. Over centuries, it grew into a vast complex of gates, courtyards, and towering columns. Walking through it, an ancient visitor would feel small, but also protected, as if surrounded by divine structure. The architecture itself created calm order through symmetry and repetition. Stone became a kind of prayer. And in that world, the sacred and the everyday flowed together like the Nile. People worked, ate, raised children, and planned for the future, while the gods remained close in symbol and story. Religion gave meaning to nature, comfort to loss, and structure to time. It helped Egypt feel steady across centuries of change. And with that sacred world in mind, we can return again to ordinary life, where most Egyptians lived their days among fields, bread ovens, markets, and quiet family rooms. Most ancient Egyptians were ordinary people living close to the Nile. Their villages sat on the edge of green fields, where the river made the ground soft and fertile. Homes were often built from mud brick, meaning sun-dried bricks made from earth and straw. These houses were simple, practical, and cool in the heat. Many had a small courtyard open to the sky, where daily life naturally gathered. Inside, life was quiet and routine. Families stored grain, tools, and baskets in small rooms and slept on simple mats. Reed mats and thatched roofs helped keep the air moving. Animals stayed nearby, including goats, chickens, and ducks, adding sound and movement to the yard. In the evenings, the courtyard could feel like a calm center of the home. Food was steady and deeply tied to the harvest. Bread was a daily foundation, often made from emmer wheat or barley. Beer was just as common, and it was part of ordinary nutrition, rather than a luxury. In many homes, baking and brewing were daily tasks, repeated with skill and patience. Meals might also include onions, beans, lentils, and vegetables pulled from gardens near the house. When families had more, they added fish from the Nile and birds caught in marshes. Ducks and geese could be raised at home or traded in the market. Wine existed, but it was usually for special moments and wealthier households. Most daily meals were simple, warm, and familiar. The comfort was not in variety, but in reliability. Life also moved with the seasons in a way that shaped work and time. During the flood season, fields could be covered with water, and planting had to pause. This did not mean people stopped working. It meant the work changed, shifting to repairs, building, and public projects. When the waters pulled back, planting began again, and harvest followed later in the year. Surplus grain was carefully stored in community granaries. This grain could support families through lean times and help supply towns and temples. It was also used as a form of tax, because Egypt often paid and measured wealth through harvest. Local officials helped manage storage and distribution. In a land built on agriculture, organization mattered almost as much as soil. Beyond farming, villages included many crafts and trades. Potters shaped jars and bowls, weavers made linen cloth, and carpenters worked with wood when it was available. Metalworkers created tools, blades, and jewelry. In markets, people traded goods directly, often using grain or small items of value. A basket of vegetables might become a piece of cloth, and cloth might become oil or tools. One of the most important roles in Egypt was the scribe. A scribe was someone trained to read and write, keeping records for the state, temples, and officials. Writing could preserve names, count supplies, and track deliveries. Scribes were not common, and their education took time and discipline. But for some families, this path offered a different future, shaped by learning rather than farming. Family life was the center of everything. Children learned by watching, helping, and repeating tasks alongside parents and relatives. Boys often followed their fathers into farming or craft work. Girls learned skills like weaving, cooking, and household management, though women could also own property and manage business. Compared to many ancient societies, Egyptian women had stronger legal rights, including control over inheritance and the ability to make contracts. Clothing was usually made from linen, meaning a light fabric produced from flax plants grown along the Nile. In the heat, linen was practical and comfortable. Most clothing was simple, though wealthier people wore finer fabric and more decoration. Jewelry was common, from beads to bracelets, and it carried both beauty and meaning. People enjoyed looking clean and well cared for. Many Egyptians used eye makeup, often black coal or green pigment. This was partly beauty, but it was also practical protection against sunlight and insects. Perfumed oils were used to keep skin comfortable in dry air. Grooming was not seen as vanity. It was part of dignity, health, and daily self-respect. Small routines helped life feel ordered. Even in a working world, Egyptians made space for leisure. People played board games like Senet, a game of strategy and luck found in tombs and homes. They listened to music, clapped rhythms, and enjoyed stories at gatherings. Festivals brought dancing and instruments into public life, especially near temples. These moments gave lightness to the year, like breath between long days. In art, Egyptians left behind vivid scenes of these everyday rhythms. Tomb walls show fishing in the reeds, harvesting grain, and families gathered near food and music. These images were not only decoration, they were a way of preserving life as it was meant to be remembered. They remind us that ancient Egypt was not only kings and monuments, but a living world filled with ordinary mornings. And when you step back, a gentle theme becomes clear. Egyptians worked hard, but they also found comfort in routine, family, and the steady return of seasons. They lived close to water and sunlight, surrounded by tasks that repeated with purpose. In that repetition, they built not only a civilization, but a way of life. And as we move forward, we can carry this quiet, everyday world with us, because it is the human heart behind everything Egypt created. After the New Kingdom ended around 1075 BC, Egypt slowly moved into a different kind of history. Power became harder to hold, dynasties shifted more quickly, and the country was ruled by many hands over the centuries. Some rulers were local, and some came from beyond Egypt's borders. Yet Egypt did not vanish. The Nile still returned, the fields still grew green, and temples continued their quiet routines. In these later centuries, Egyptian life carried two stories at once. One story is about changing rulers and shifting politics. The other is about continuity in daily habits, religion, and local identity. Even when foreign kings arrived, many Egyptians still honored familiar gods and maintained the same seasonal rhythms. Culture often survives in ordinary routines, even when leadership changes. A major turning point came in 525 BC, when Egypt was conquered by Persia. The Persian king Cambyses II defeated Egyptian forces and claimed Egypt as part of a wider empire. This began a period often called Persian rule, when foreign governors and armies held political control. Yet many Egyptian traditions continued under this new power. Temples still functioned, priesthoods remained active, and sacred life carried on. Over time, Egypt entered a new chapter shaped by the wider Mediterranean world. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great arrived, and Egypt accepted him as a liberator from Persian rule. He traveled along the Nile and visited sacred places connected to Amun, including the desert oracle at Siwa. Alexander also founded Alexandria, a new city on the coast that would become a great center of learning and trade. Egypt was becoming part of a larger world, connected by sea as much as by river. After Alexander's death, one of his generals, Ptolemy, took control of Egypt. This began the Ptolemaic dynasty, meaning a Greek royal family that ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. The Ptolemies presented themselves as pharaohs, adopting Egyptian titles and supporting temple traditions. Greek and Egyptian culture began to blend, especially in cities. You could see this in art, language, and the way old gods gained new forms. Even with Greek influence, Egypt remained deeply itself. Temples still used ancient symbols, and rituals still followed familiar patterns. Priests continued daily offerings, and festivals still filled streets with sound and color. For many people, life did not change all at once. The river still shaped farming, and the seasons still guided work. The surface changed, but the foundation stayed. The last and most famous ruler of this dynasty was Cleopatra VII, who ruled from 51 to 30 BC. Cleopatra is remembered as intelligent, politically skilled, and deeply aware of the world around her. She formed alliances with powerful Roman figures such as Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. She also presented herself in Egyptian style, linking her image to Isis, the goddess of protection and devotion. In Cleopatra, Egypt's ancient identity and the Mediterranean political world meet face to face. Cleopatra's reign ended in a dramatic turning point. In 30 BC, after conflict with Rome, Egypt lost its independence and became part of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra and Mark Antony both died, and Roman control began under Octavian, who later became Emperor Augustus. Egypt was no longer ruled by pharaohs in the traditional sense, but Egyptian culture did not end with one ruler's fall. Under Roman rule, Egypt remained extremely valuable. The Nile's harvests made Egypt a major source of grain, feeding cities far beyond its borders. Temples stayed open for generations, and rituals continued in many places. Egyptian gods were even honored outside Egypt, spreading into the wider Roman world. For a long time, the sacred and the ancient still felt present. Over centuries, the religious landscape gradually changed. New beliefs rose, including Christianity, which spread across the Roman Empire. Later, in the 7th century AD, Egypt became part of the Islamic world as well. These changes shaped language, religion, and public life. And yet, Egypt's older identity remained visible in its land, its monuments, and its memory. This is one of the quiet wonders of Egypt. It was conquered more than once, but it kept its shape. Stone temples stood through changing rulers. Local traditions survived through families and villages. Even when hieroglyphs stopped being used, the walls still held their carved stories. Egypt's past remained physically present, like a landscape that refuses to be erased. Today, ancient Egypt is still close enough to imagine. Pyramids and temples still stand against open sky. Columns still hold up shadows in places like Karnak. Tombs and statues still preserve faces that were meant to last forever. These monuments do not only show power, they show patience and planning, repeated across centuries. And perhaps that is the lasting feeling Egypt leaves behind. A sense that life can be steady, even when history is not. The Nile still flows through the desert, just as it did long ago. The sun still rises and moves across the same wide sky, and the stones still catch that light, holding warmth and silence. As this lecture ends, we can return to that calm image. Nile water moving slowly past reeds and fields, a soft wind over sand, and distant shapes of temples resting in the dark. Ancient Egypt was built by kings and priests, but also by ordinary people who loved life enough to prepare for its continuation. And if you are still listening, you can let the story fade gently into quiet, the way sunlight fades into evening over the river. And that brings our story to a close for tonight. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed it, a like is always appreciated. And if you'd like to hear more, you're welcome to subscribe. Until then, rest easy. Good night.